right borderline 3, maybe down into the 2 category. That's what Carol was, and indeed that's the kind of conditions that are created up there.
And that means its speeds are 115 miles an hour on a rather steady basis, with gusts still up in the 130, 35 mile an hour range?
Exactly right. And of course the big killer there is the water itself. Our models are indicating you might get as much as 15 feet or more in the Buzzards Bay area south of Rhode Island there, south of Providence, Rhode Island. And now we're getting the reports of those flash floods inland.
Bob, sometimes it's hard for people at home to understand the overlay, the kind of map you had behind you there. If the hurricane continues its present movement on its present course, what areas, what states would be most in danger? You've said right now that the eastern tip of Long Island, New York is catching it. What other areas are in the paths of possibly tides as high as 15 feet above normal?
Okay, on the map here we have Long Island. The eastern tip is right here. Here's the eye wall of the hurricane with the wind circulating like this, which means it pushes the water ashore here in Rhode Island and the eastern part of Connecticut, right on through the Cape Cod area, Nantucket area, right on up into the Boston area where the stronger winds are going to be. And that condition with heavy rains, possibility of an isolated tornado or two, are going to spread right on up into Maine by this afternoon.
2 points, Bob, and check me as we go along here. One is that as great a danger as the wind is, and it is a danger, the basic danger, the most important danger is rising water.
That's correct. The storm surge on the coast and then the flash floods inland. That's where we lose most of our people.
And what a lot of people don't understand is in the wake of these hurricanes, frequently tornadoes are spawned off on the edges.
Exactly right. Some isolated tornadoes or two that'll be in those areas. And of course, all those big trees, you get into places like Boston with large buildings. Then you get strong winds there, glass flies, comes out of those buildings and so on.
You mentioned Hurricane Carol in 1954, which came along about August 30th, 1954. That killed 68 people in the northeast United States. You see that as the closest thing to this current hurricane.
That's the potential. And yes, we're talking about a storm very similar to that. And I'm a little concerned, Dan, because we're getting calls from people up there who say because of the Soviet Union situation, they're not aware of just how severe this storm is. And so we appreciate what you're doing.
Well, that's a very good point, Bob. That, obviously, the Soviet Union story is a magna, I can't find the word. It's an right. Absolutely overwhelming international story. But for people in the path of this hurricane, Bob Sheets, you've seen many of these go. What is your basic concern? That people will take it for granted, not understand how big and how powerful it is?
Yes, I think that's it. And what happens if you get that continuous coverage and they understand what happens with that storm surge, they see those reports, and then they realize you've got a severe hurricane out there. And Hugo, they knew it because of what happened down in the Caribbean. The people in Charleston did the right thing. And we haven't had that here. The event is taking place where the people are, and I'm concerned that they're not taking it seriously enough. All
right, Bob Sheets, I'm at home. I live in a somewhat coastal area of Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. I'm a mother at home with 2 kids. What should I do? What can I do?
Right now, just stay inside because it's almost too late to take any other action. If you're in an area that has potential flash floods, then you need to move because that's the kind of problem you can have. You start to get a little bit of a hills there, you get up there in New England, and so you get those potential flash floods. So you need to be taking those kind of actions. Otherwise, stay inside. Don't be out there with your cars up and down the roads and all the problems that are going to occur out there, electric lines down, all those kind of things.
And perhaps we can't emphasize enough, Bob, worry about the rising water, flash floods, immense tides, sea surge, all of those real and present danger.
Exactly right. We're on the immediate coast in particular where you get that storm surge coming in, and some people go out there, you know how the surfers are, they will get out there and look for that, and other people just got to go down and see the excitement of that. And I'm saying don't do that. Stay home and let the storm pass. By this afternoon, it ought to be clearing up fairly nicely.
Bob Sheets, thank you very much. Bob Sheets live from the Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida. Very difficult to tell what the situation is in the Soviet Union as a whole. We've said it before, we say it again. It's such an immense country covering several continents, such a wide, not only geographical area, but wide, divergent mix in its population and ethnic backgrounds and the heritage, its history. For example, very important.
Sweeping up the eastern seaboard as we speak. It's about to roar across southern New Brunswick. It will probably hit the Fredericton area around midnight tonight. And on Live at 5 today, we're going to take a look at how we are all going to be affected by this storm and exactly when. Hello again, I'm Steve Murphy. Nancy Regan is on holidays. Also coming up on our program today, words to the wise, what we should all do to prepare for the next hurricane.
Tonight at 6, besides continuing the tracking of Hurricane Bob, political turmoil in the Soviet Union.
Big news tonight, Dave. Hurricane Bob is sweeping up the eastern seaboard. It will cross southern New Brunswick tonight, but it will affect all of the maritime provinces as it comes. Meteorologist Richard Zarowski just back from assignment with Wonder Why out on the west coast, just in time to track the hurricane. I guess your timing is good in that respect. What can you tell us about the latest location and coordinates and so on?
Well, Bob right now is just off the coast of Boston, maybe 35 or 40 miles, about 50 kilometers, and it's starting to move northeast through the Bay of Fundy, and it will be coming into the maritime regions around St. Stephen sometime around 11 o'clock tonight. And it'll be packing winds upwards of 185 kilometers an hour. As it moves inland, it will start to die down, but that will not be soon enough for most of the maritime regions, as it's still drawing some strength from the Bay of Fundy, which is relatively warm. Precipitation amounts could be anywhere from 100 to 150 millimeters of rain. Now, if you're still in the imperial measurement, Steve, that's anywhere between 6 and 8 inches of rain.
Richard, I am no expert on the weather as you are, but this is a big, ugly storm.
It is.
Why don't we take a look at it? Because
Okay.
it's immense. In fact, you can hardly even see the Maritimes under the immensity, or immenseness, I guess, of Hurricane Bob.
This is a close-up view of the Maritimes. Here's a view which shows it a little more spread out. Now, basically, you can see it affects all the eastern seaboard, pretty much south of, I guess, Boston, and north of the seaboard as well, right into the maritime regions. What we can expect to see is Bob do this over the next 12 hours. Move into the mouth of the Bay of Fundy, and then move off the coast of PEI, and then up into Newfoundland before it's all done. Now, earlier this year, I met with Chief Meteorologist Max Mayfield at the National Hurricane Center in Miami to discuss hurricanes and their effects. In the Maritimes, hurricanes are a fact of life. Between the months of June and November, as many as 5 to 7 hurricanes can be expected to come close. And in a bad year, 1 or 2 can cut a swath of destruction right through the Maritimes. Is the East Coast a particularly bad area for hurricanes?
Well, it is. One reason it's so bad is the recurving problem. It's very, very difficult to forecast the recurvature, and because the East Coast is so populated. We've built up so much on the coast now, and a lot of these people have moved into these coastal areas since they've had the last hurricane. They really don't know what a hurricane is all about.
Bob is expected to cut a path through the Bay of Fundy close to the cities of St. Stephen, Fredericton, and north of Summerside over the next 12 hours. The peak winds are forecast to be near 100 knots, or 170 kilometers per hour, along with heavy rainfall giving as much as 3 to 5 inches. A hurricane gets its incredible winds from the warmth of the water. And from the track that Hurricane Bob is taking, it looks like it'll be packing quite a punch as it travels through the Maritimes. Bob is a fast-moving storm that is expected to be in the Maritimes for only 6 to 8 hours, but in that time, it has the potential to do great damage. Coastal areas with tidal and wave action are expected to be hardest hit.
Well, most of them, in fact, more than half of them, will indeed recurve up into the northern waters. And, of course, the water temperatures are cooler up there. Once the hurricane moves over the cooler waters, it will start to dissipate. Bob is only the second named storm of the season, but its track could make it potentially the worst. And by preparing for the worst, it is possible to minimize its destructive impact.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Obviously, as Bob approaches the Maritimes, it's moving quickly, as Richard says. A steady stream of traffic is heading for dock sides as boat owners try to prevent damage to their vessels. But, you know, few people realize that equal...
Atlantic Canada, this is ATV News 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. In just a moment, we will be going live to Washington for the latest on the coup in the Soviet Union, where just a short time ago, the deputy mayor of Moscow warned women and children to leave the Russian Republic's parliament building. He says an attack by Soviet troops is imminent. Armored vehicles, riot control vehicles, and bulldozers are said to be headed towards central Moscow. One report says Russian Republic government ministers are being given guns and gas masks. Republic President Boris Yeltsin has apparently been the focal point of the resistance to the coup that ousted Mikhail Gorbachev from power. Yeltsin has issued a statement calling for the reinstatement of the deposed leader. He's also demanding a meeting with the ousted leader. We go live now to Washington, where CNN's Skip Lozier has the latest. Now, back in our region, people are cleaning up following last night's hurricane, which actually turned out to be just a tropical storm. But even though it was downgraded, it still claimed two 17-year-old girls were swept out to sea by Hurricane Bob last night near Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. They are presumed drowned. The pair were part of a group that gathered at a lighthouse to watch the big waves turned up by the storm. Two men who were also washed off the rocks did manage to get back to shore. Meanwhile, in New Brunswick, power crews started the day today by trying to restore power to about 5,000 homes through the province. But all in all, damage was minimal. Mike Cameron has more.
City crews worked through the night and into this morning, cleaning up debris from the overnight tropical storm. The morning light exposed pockets of damage, mostly branches torn from trees. Some crossed power lines, but NB Power says province-wide, only about 5,000 people experienced some kind of power interruption.
There are lots of broken trees and lots of areas experienced power outages, but Bob did not live up to his billing.
St. John had winds which gusted up to 96 kilometers per hour, but the rain was a no-show. The city only received just over an inch of rain. But during the night, crews nervously watched the tide markers in low-lying areas. The heaviest rain fell in western New Brunswick. Up to 3 inches fell from Woodstock to Edmundston. The tropical storm continued to lose steam as it crossed over the province and into Bathurst this morning. No significant damage was reported. The same is true on PEI, though some precautions had been taken in Charlottetown. Marine Atlantic ferries are back in service on the Bay of Fundy, and winds are expected to diminish as the day goes on. In St. John, Mike Cameron, ATV News.
Now, we just got these pictures in just a few minutes ago, and they show the remnants of Hurricane Bob, which are having a devastating effect on the small community of Petit Rocher in northern New Brunswick. Now, at least 2 herring boats have either sunk or are sinking in the town's harbor. One man apparently suffered a heart attack while on his boat this morning also. Rescue crews are on the scene now trying to salvage what they can. Huge waves, though, continue to lash the harbor. Down power lines and uprooted trees are also hindering those efforts. Meanwhile, south of the border, people in the United States and the Northeast are still cleaning up after yesterday's Hurricane 2. Hurricane Bob knocked out power to an estimated 1.5 million people. At least 6 people were killed. At its peak, its sustained winds were more than 185 kilometers an hour. In fact, they had gusts up to 222 kilometers an hour. As the storm moved up the coast on Monday, Navy submarines left their berths in Connecticut for the safety of the deep. Nuclear power plants cut power as a precaution. And in Portland, Maine, the sea rolled like boiling water. Fierce waves off Massachusetts spit fish into the air and tossed boats around like toys. It might have been, though. Some people believe that's because U.S. residents were prepared this time, prepared after the disasters of Hurricane Hugo. John Zarella has more.
The winds never approached hurricane force at Morehead City, North Carolina. The clouds racing across the sky at dusk told the story. Bob was passing to the east, heading north fast. A cat huddled in a doorway against the wind was one of the few creatures left behind to weather the storm. The day after the storm that didn't hit, people who had evacuated returned to get their lives back to normal, peeling tape off windows and taking down the plywood protection.
Yeah, this is easier than rebuilding.
The memory of people losing everything during Hurricane Hugo in Charleston prompted vacationers Dick and Lois Hunter to leave the beach for higher ground.
I didn't even question when they said get out, you know, because that was devastating, you know, and I just didn't want to be in the middle of that. I think it's, you got to use your head about some of these things.
For Sam McConkey, it felt good to walk on his intact fishing pier. 2 years ago, Hugo removed 200 feet of it.
And that's what I was expecting with this storm because the waves were pretty good size. But this storm veered off and we didn't have the waves like we normally would have with a hurricane.
City officials say the lead time they got from hurricane forecasters helped greatly in the evacuation. But it was the Hugo experience down south that motivated people here to leave.
Hugo was still clear in everyone's mind, and also we remember a situation where we had the traffic jams on the beach bridges and also on the beach itself. And a lot of the statewide tourists remember that, and so they knew it was a situation where the quicker they got out, the better.
The hope here is that if and when another storm approaches, residents and tourists will respond just the way they did this time.
There is a sense of relief in all of North Carolina, a feeling amongst the people that they dodged a major bullet. Yet there is the realization that
the pump couldn't keep going, so it was taking lots of water through the windows and through the hull here. It has to water goes over the pump, and the pump could keep running. So
none of the boats were insured. MLA Pierre Godin says he'll ask the McKenna government for compensation.
And I'm sure the government will put some money to help people who are not fishermen, who are not assured for that kind of storm that we got, something like that.
The $50,000 fiberglass boat belonging to Godin's brother Gilles was still underwater tonight. All efforts to resurface it failed. Hurricane Bob is the worst storm here in 20 years, a storm no one expected and will long remember. André Vigneault, CBC News, Petit Rocher.
In St. John, city works crews spent the day cleaning up. As the storm approached last night, everybody prepared for the worst. These people decided it wasn't a night for camping.
So what are you going to do now?
I'm just going to put this down. I'm going back to my nephews. Stay there.
And no sooner had the Strouds made that decision than the winds increased and the rains came. The preparations at the Royal Kennebecasis Yacht Club included final docking adjustments for a naval reserve vessel there. And the Yacht Club's yard steward spent the night on this boat to make sure it stayed right here. New Brunswick, at least, no loss of life. Michael Holmes, CBC News, St. John.
The boats in the bay handled Bob all right. There was some slight damage here and there, but for the most part, the sailors weren't hit too hard.
It just skipped over Fredericton and then hit Bathurst so hard.
Well, actually, Bob came out of Fredericton and headed just south of Chatham and hit the Gulf there. The storm didn't intensify as such, but yet the strongest area of that storm was to the northwest of it, and it just so happened that Bathurst was in its path.
So it wasn't the strength of Bob itself, it was the strength of Bob coupled with some other factors locally.
Most definitely. The storm once hit the water again on the northeast side of New Brunswick, caused the tides to go up a couple of meters. There was an onshore situation there also, as the winds were blowing in the area of 50 to 60 knots, so therefore caused some damage.
Yeah. So where's Bob now?
Bob is headed up through the southern Gulf towards Newfoundland, and in around 9 p.m. tonight it should sit just west of the Newfoundland Island and in the Stephenville area.
Election day, party